350. That was the number glaring back at me from the small digital screen of my glucose monitor. 350 meant my blood was turning into syrup. It meant my head felt like it was being squeezed in a vice, and my mouth was so dry it felt like I had swallowed a handful of sand. I sat up in bed, the rusty springs groaning under me. The air in my basement apartment was heavy, smelling of damp concrete and the mold that grew in the corners of the ceiling like a black cancer. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the blurry vision that always came when my sugar was this high. I reached for my insulin pen on the nightstand. It was light. Too light. I held it up to the dim light filtering through the small window near the ceiling. There were maybe 10 units left. 10 units. That had to last me 4 days. I did the math in my head, a calculation I performed every single morning. If I ate nothing but eggs and water, I could maybe stretch it. If I skipped lunch. If I walked the 2 miles to the warehouse instead of taking the bus to save the fare for next week's refill. I dialed up 3 units. Just enough to keep me out of the hospital, but not enough to make me feel human. I injected it into my thigh, gritting my teeth as the needle went in. It was a dull pinch, one I had felt thousands of times since I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 14. I dragged myself out of bed and walked to the tiny kitchenette. My fridge was humming loudly, a dying machine I couldn't afford to fix. Inside, there was a carton of eggs, a half-empty jug of water, and a wilting head of lettuce. This was the life of Valerie, 26 years old, graduated with honors in architecture, currently moving boxes in a logistics warehouse for minimum wage. I cracked 2 eggs into a pan. While they sizzled, I made the mistake of opening Instagram on my cracked phone. The first story that popped up was my sister, Sienna. The video was bright and clear. Sienna was wrapped in a fluffy white robe, holding a glass of green juice. The caption read, "Morning spa routine, #blessed." "Hey guys," Sienna's voice chirped through the tinny speaker of my phone. "Just getting a diamond facial before the big family dinner tonight. My skin is so stressed from all the traveling." I stared at the screen. A diamond facial cost $300. That was exactly the cost of 2 vials of insulin. I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat. I turned off the phone and shoveled the eggs into my mouth. They tasted like ash. I had to get to work. If I was late again, the foreman would dock my pay, and I was already $50 short on rent. I put on my work boots, the ones with the hole in the left sole, and grabbed my backpack. I took one last look at the black mold spreading on the ceiling. It looked like a storm cloud, waiting to break. The hallway outside my apartment always smelled of boiled cabbage and old wood. It was a smell I had grown to associate with safety, mostly because of Mrs. Higgins. As I locked my door, the door across the hall creaked open. Mrs. Higgins peeked out. She was 72, a tiny woman with hair like cotton candy and a back permanently hunched from years of scrubbing floors. She wore a faded floral housecoat that had seen better decades. "Valerie, dear," she called out, her voice raspy but warm. I tensed up. "Rent was due 3 days ago." "Good morning, Mrs. Higgins. I promise, I'll have the rent by Friday. I'm picking up an extra shift at the warehouse." Mrs. Higgins waved her hand dismissively, her knuckles swollen with arthritis. "Oh, hush now. I know you're good for it. You always pay, eventually. Better than the man in 4B who ran off in the night." She shuffled closer, holding a plastic container. "I made too much vegetable soup last night. My eyes are bigger than my stomach these days. I thought you might want some for lunch." I looked at the container. It was warm. I could see carrots and potatoes floating in a rich broth. My stomach growled loudly, betraying me. "Mrs. Higgins, I can't," I started, though my hands were already reaching for it. "Take it," she insisted, pressing it into my hands. "You're looking thin, Valerie. Thinner than last week. Are you eating enough?" I forced a smile. "I'm on a diet. Intermittent fasting. It's all the rage." She looked at me, her cloudy blue eyes sharp with worry. She didn't buy it. She reached into the pocket of her housecoat and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. "Here," she whispered, tucking it into my hand. "Mrs. Higgins, no." I tried to give it back. She was barely scraping by herself. She relied on Social Security and the meager rent from this crumbling building. "Buy some fresh fruit," she said sternly. "Or whatever medicine you need. I saw you squinting at the mail yesterday like you couldn't see the letters. That happens to my diabetic cousin when his sugar is off." I froze. She noticed. My own mother hadn't noticed I'd lost 15 pounds in 2 months, but my landlady noticed I was squinting at the mail. Tears pricked my eyes. I squeezed her hand. "Thank you. I'll pay you back. I swear." "Go on, you'll be late," she shooed me away. I walked out into the cold morning air, clutching the warm soup and the $20 bill. That $20 was a lifeline. It meant I could buy a box of test strips. It meant I wouldn't be flying blind for the next few days. As I walked to the bus stop, a bitter thought took root in my mind. A stranger, a woman who counted pennies to buy cat food, had just shown me more compassion in 2 minutes than my own family had in 7 years. The warehouse was grueling. Lifting 50-pound boxes of electronics that I could never afford, stacking them on pallets, wrapping them in plastic. My arms shook, and the dizziness came and went in waves. During my 15-minute break, I sat on a crate and let my mind drift back to last Tuesday. The memory was still raw, a fresh wound that refused to close. I had been at this same warehouse when I collapsed. 1 minute I was scanning a barcode, the next I was waking up in the back of an ambulance, the siren wailing in my ears. Diabetic ketoacidosis. DKA. My body was eating itself because it didn't have insulin. My blood had turned acidic. In the emergency room, the doctor, a tired-looking man with dark circles under his eyes, told me I needed 4 fluids and an insulin drip. He told me I should stay for observation for at least 24 hours. Then the finance lady came in with her clipboard. "Valerie," she said, not unkindly. "Your insurance has a high deductible. We need a copay of $200 to admit you fully. Otherwise, we can stabilize you, but we can't keep you." $200. I had $40 in my bank account. I asked for my phone. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped it twice. I dialed my mother, Beatrice. She answered on the second ring. I could hear clinking glasses and laughter in the background. "Mom?" I croaked. My voice sounded wrecked. "Valerie? Make it quick, we're at a wine tasting in Napa." "The signal is terrible," she said. She sounded annoyed, not concerned. "Mom, I'm in the hospital," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. My sugar spiked. "I have DKA. They need $200 for the copay or they're going to discharge me." There was a pause. I heard her cover the phone and say something to someone nearby, probably my father, Garrett. Then she came back on the line. "Oh, Valerie, honestly. You always do this at the worst times." "Do this?" I whispered. "Mom, I'm sick." "You're irresponsible," she snapped. "You know we're liquid poor right now. All our assets are tied up in the new investments for the family brand. We can't just wire cash whenever you forget to take your medicine." "I didn't forget," I cried, tears hot on my cheeks. I ran out. "Mom, please. I feel like I'm dying." "Stop being dramatic," she sighed. "Ask the hospital for a payment plan. We have to go, the sommelier is opening a vintage reserve. Figure it out, Valerie. You're an adult." The line went dead. I sat there in the hospital bed, the phone slipping from my fingers. I looked at the finance lady. She looked pitying, which was worse than her being angry. "I'll take the discharge papers," I told her. I signed a form that said against medical advice. They gave me a shot of insulin, a bag of saline, and sent me out the door. I walked home in the rain because I didn't have money for a cab. I walked 3 miles, shivering, feeling the acid still churning in my veins. Back in the warehouse, the brake buzzer sounded loud and harsh, snapping me out of the memory. I stood up, my legs heavy. That phone call had changed something in me. Before that, I was hurt. I was sad. But after that call, after realizing my mother chose a glass of wine over my life, the sadness had burned away. All that was left was a cold, hard block of ice where my heart used to be. My shift ended at 5 p.m. My back screamed in protest as I clocked out. I checked my phone. There was a text message from my father, Garrett. It had come in 3 hours ago. I opened it. No greeting. No how are you? It read, Grandpa Silas is back from Switzerland. Dinner at the Gilded Lily. 7 p.m. sharp. Do not embarrass us. Wear something expensive. We need to look successful. My heart skipped a beat. Grandpa Silas. He had been gone for 7 years, living in a specialized medical facility in Zurich for his lungs. He was the patriarch, the one who built the family fortune from a single hardware store into a real estate empire. He was also the only person who had ever called me sweetheart without adding a criticism afterward. If Grandpa was back, maybe things could change. Maybe he would help me. I didn't want a handout, I just wanted a loan. Just enough to get a continuous glucose monitor so I didn't have to prick my fingers until they were calloused. I rushed home. I had less than 2 hours. I stripped off my dusty work clothes and took a 3-minute shower, conserving the hot water. I wrapped myself in a towel and looked at my closet. It was a sad collection of thrift store finds and worn-out basics. Wear something expensive, my father had said. I pulled out the only dress I had that looked decent. It was a navy blue sheath dress I had bought at a consignment shop for my graduation 4 years ago. It was tight now, not because I had gained weight, but because the cheap fabric had shrunk in the wash. I inspected it. There was a loose thread on the hem. I carefully snipped it with a pair of nail scissors. Then came the shoes. My black pumps were scuffed at the toes, the leather peeling away to reveal the gray material underneath. I sat on the edge of my bed and grabbed a black permanent marker. With the precision of a surgeon, I colored in the scuffs. In the dim light of the apartment, it looked passable. In the bright lights of a 5-star restaurant, it would look pathetic. But it was all I had. I did my makeup in the reflection of the bathroom mirror, which was missing a corner. I used the last of my foundation to cover the dark circles under my eyes. I put on a generic red lipstick to distract from my pale cheeks. I looked at myself. I looked tired. I looked hungry. But I also looked determined. I wasn't going for my parents. I was going for Silas. And maybe, just maybe, I was going to get some answers. The Gilded Lily was in the financial district, about 3 miles from my apartment. A cab would cost $20. That was the $20 Mrs. Higgins had given me. I couldn't spend it on a ride. I needed it for food. So, I walked. I walked fast, trying to beat the clock. The heels pinched my toes with every step. The humidity was high, and I could feel beads of sweat forming on my forehead, threatening to ruin my makeup. By the time I reached the restaurant, my feet were blistered and bleeding inside the shoes. I paused around the corner to catch my breath and wiped my face with a tissue. A sleek, white Range Rover pulled up to the valet stand in front of the restaurant. I watched from the shadows. My father, Garrett, stepped out first. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my entire year's rent. He adjusted his cufflinks, looking around to see who was watching. Then my mother, Beatrice, emerged. She wore a silk emerald green dress that shimmered under the streetlights. She looked beautiful, in a sharp, dangerous way. Finally, Sienna hopped out. She was laughing, holding onto the arm of a guy I recognized from her Instagram. Trey. Her new boyfriend. He was handsome in a generic way, wearing a watch that glinted gold. They looked like a magazine cover. The perfect family. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the shadows. I walked up the driveway just as they were handing the keys to the valet. Sienna saw me first. Her smile dropped instantly. "Ew," she said, loud enough for the valet to hear. "Did you walk here? You're sweating." Trey snickered, looking me up and down. "Is this the sister?" he asked, sounding amused. Beatrice turned, her eyes scanning me like a barcode reader. She frowned at my dress, then at my shoes. Her gaze lingered on the black marker patch on my toe. "Valerie," she sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. "You look disheveled. I told you to look expensive." "I did my best, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "It's good to see you too." "Don't be sarcastic," Garrett snapped. "Fix your hair. You look like you just woke up." "I just finished an 8-hour shift," I said. "Nobody cares about your manual labor stories," Sienna interrupted, linking her arm with Trey. "Just don't stand too close to me inside. You smell like the outside." They turned and walked into the golden revolving doors, leaving me standing on the pavement. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I reached into my purse and touched my phone. I had installed a live streaming app months ago, mostly to watch other people's dramas. I had never broadcasted anything. But tonight, a feeling in my gut told me to have it ready. I followed them inside. The inside of the Gilded Lily was overwhelming. The ceilings were 20 feet high, adorned with crystal chandeliers that looked like frozen explosions. The air smelled of truffle oil and expensive perfume. We were led to a private dining room at the back. It was enclosed by glass walls, separating us from the commoners but putting us on display for them to envy. And there, sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, was Grandpa Silas. He looked older than I remembered. His hair was completely white now, and he used a cane with a silver wolf's head handle. He was thinner, his suit hanging a bit loose on his frame. But his eyes were the same. Steel gray. Sharp. Alert. As soon as we entered, my parents' demeanor changed instantly. "Dad!" Garrett boomed, rushing forward with his arms wide. "You look fantastic. Switzerland treated you well." Beatrice pecked him on the cheek. "We missed you so much, Silas. The family just wasn't the same without you." Sienna ran up and hugged him. "Grandpa. I love your cane. It's so chic." Silas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He patted Sienna's hand politely, then his gaze shifted to the back of the room. "To me. Valerie," he said. His voice was raspy, like dry leaves. I walked forward. I wanted to run to him, but I held back. "Hi, Grandpa." He stood up, waving away Garrett's offer to help. He pulled me into a hug. He felt fragile, like a bird. He held me for a long time, longer than a normal greeting. Then he pulled back and held me by the shoulders. His grip tightened. He was feeling my collarbones, which were protruding sharply. He looked at my arms, thin and pale. "You've lost weight, Val," he said quietly. It wasn't a compliment. It was an accusation. Before I could answer, Garrett jumped in. "Oh, you know Valerie, Dad. She's on this new diet. Intermittent fasting. Very trendy. She's trying to get that model look." "Is that so?" Silas asked, not looking at Garrett. He was looking right into my eyes. "Something like that," I whispered. I couldn't expose them yet. Not until I knew where I stood. "Sit," Silas commanded. "Next to me." Beatrice looked annoyed. She clearly wanted Sienna next to him. But she forced a smile and sat on his other side. I took my seat. I placed my purse on the floor and set my phone against the floral centerpiece in the middle of the table. The vase was huge, filled with white orchids. It was the perfect camouflage. I positioned the phone so the camera lens peered through the leaves, framing the entire table. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't press go live yet. I just unlocked the screen. My heart was pounding against my ribs. I felt dizzy again. I needed food. I looked at the bread basket. I wanted to grab a roll, but Beatrice shot me a look that said, "Don't you dare touch that carbs." I took a sip of water instead. The water was cold. The room was cold. But the heat coming from my family was scorching. The waiters arrived like a synchronized swimming team, placing plates of appetizers on the table. Carpaccio. Oysters. Truffle fries. I was starving. My hand shook as I reached for a fork. I speared a piece of beef and put it in my mouth. It was delicious, rich and salty. I ate another piece, then another. "Slow down, Valerie," Beatrice hissed from across the table. "You're eating like a refugee. It's embarrassing." "I'm hungry, Mom," I said, not looking up. "Well, show some restraint," she said, adjusting her napkin. She turned to Silas, her voice transforming into honey. "So, Silas, you missed so much. The family business has been booming. We've expanded into lifestyle branding." "Lifestyle branding?" Silas asked, raising an eyebrow. "I thought we were in real estate." "We are," Garrett said, puffing out his chest. "But Sienna here is the face of the new generation. She's a brand ambassador. She brings in the youth demographic." "I have 200,000 followers on TikTok, Grandpa," Sienna chimed in, chewing gum. "I influence people to buy luxury homes." "Impressive," Silas said dryly. He turned to me. "And you, Valerie? How is the architecture career? You graduated top of your class, didn't you?" I opened my mouth to speak. I wanted to tell him that I couldn't get my license because I couldn't afford to work for free as an intern for 2 years, which was the industry standard. I wanted to tell him I was moving boxes. But Garrett cut me off. "She quit, Dad. She lacked the drive. The architecture world is tough, you know? Dog eat dog. Valerie, well, she's softer. She prefers working in a warehouse. Less pressure." I froze. "I didn't quit," I said, my voice trembling. "I couldn't afford the internship. I needed a paying job." "Excuses," Beatrice laughed lightly, waving her hand. "Some people are just destined for mediocrity, Silas. We accept Valerie for who she is. Not everyone can be a star like Sienna." Trey snickered next to Sienna. "Yeah, warehouse work builds character, right?" My face burned. I gripped the tablecloth under the table. They were rewriting my history right in front of him. They were painting me as a failure to justify why they treated me like trash. I looked at the phone hidden in the flowers. The screen was dark, but the app was open. I felt a surge of anger so pure it cleared my dizziness. "Let's have a toast," Garrett announced, clapping his hands. "Waiter! Bring us the Chateau Margaux. The 1996 vintage." The waiter nodded respectfully. "Excellent choice, sir. That bottle is $5,000. Garrett waved his hand. "Only the best for my father's return." $5,000. I did the math instantly. A vial of insulin was $300. That bottle of wine was nearly 17 vials. That was 6 months of life for me. My father was about to drink 6 months of my life in one evening. The waiter brought the bottle, uncorking it with ceremony. He poured a small amount for Garrett to taste. Garrett swirled it, sniffed it, and closed his eyes like he was having a religious experience. "Notes of leather and dark berries," Garrett proclaimed. "Perfect." The waiter poured glasses for everyone. When he got to me, I covered my glass. "Just water, please. Alcohol messes with my sugar." "More for us," Sienna said, grabbing her glass. Beatrice raised her glass. To family, she said, her eyes glittering. And to the abundance we deserve. She looked directly at me when she said deserve. It was a look of triumph. She had the jewelry, the clothes, the approval. I had the hand-me-downs and the warehouse job. In her mind, the universe had decided who was worthy. My hand slid under the table and found my phone. I didn't look down. I knew exactly where the button was. I swiped my thumb. Livestream, on. I tilted the phone slightly so the camera had a clear view of Garrett holding the $5,000 glass of wine. To family, I whispered. I watched the small counter on the corner of the screen. 0 viewers. Then 3. Then 10. The algorithm was picking it up. I had titled the stream, Dining with the Family That Watched Me Almost Die. Garrett took a long sip. Ah. You can taste the money, he joked. I felt a cold calm settle over me. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was a documentarian. I was witnessing a crime scene. The dinner progressed. The viewer count on my phone ticked up steadily. 50. 100. People loved drama. Sienna was in the middle of a story about her recent trip to Cabo. It was so stressful, Grandpa, she complained, playing with a diamond bracelet on her wrist. The resort ran out of the specific sparkling water I like. Can you imagine? Tragic, Silas murmured, sipping his water. He hadn't touched his wine. Look what Mom and Dad got me for getting through it, though, Sienna said, holding up her wrist. The bracelet sparkled under the chandelier lights. It's custom. Real diamonds. Silas leaned in. Beautiful. How much was it? Sienna beamed. Only $8,000. A steal, right? $8,000. The room seemed to tilt. Last week, I had called begging for $50. 50. And they said they were liquid poor. 8,000, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. Don't be jealous, Val, Sienna smirked. Maybe if you worked harder, you could buy one. I asked you for $50 last week, I said, louder this time. For my medicine. You said you were broke. Beatrice stiffened. She kicked me hard under the table. Her heel dug into my shin. Shut up, she hissed through a fake smile. Don't ruin this dinner. I didn't shut up. I looked at the camera lens hidden in the orchids. You bought an $8,000 bracelet the same week I was rationing my insulin. We prioritize investments, Garrett said smoothly, though his eyes darted nervously to Silas. Sienna's image is an investment. Your medicine, well, that's a recurring cost, isn't it? You need to learn to budget better. Budget better? I laughed. It was a dry, cracking sound. I make $15 an hour. My rent is $1,200. My insulin is $600. Do the math, Dad. Stop it. Beatrice snapped, slamming her hand on the table. You always play the victim. You're spoiling your grandfather's homecoming. I glanced at the phone. 400 viewers. The comments were starting to scroll. Is this real? That mom is evil. $8,000 for a bracelet but no meds for the daughter? The trap was set. They had just admitted it. They had admitted they had the money, and they chose jewelry over my health. Now, I just needed Silas to close the jaws of the trap. The waiters were clearing the main course plates. The atmosphere at the table was thick with tension. Beatrice was glaring at me with pure hatred. Garrett was drinking his wine too fast, his face flushing red. Sienna was scrolling on her phone, oblivious to the storm brewing. Silas cleared his throat. It was a quiet sound, but it silenced the table instantly. He placed his napkin neatly on the table. He clasped his hands together and looked at me. His expression was unreadable. Valerie, he said softly. I noticed something. What, Grandpa? I asked. You haven't thanked me yet. I frowned. Thanked you? For the dinner? It's lovely, Grandpa. Thank you. Silas shook his head slowly. No. Not for the dinner. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. For the monthly allowance. I have wired $4,000 to your account on the first of every month for the last 7 years. Since the day I left for Switzerland. The world stopped. I stared at him. I couldn't process the words. $4,000. Every month. For 7 years. What? I breathed. Grandpa, I don't know what you're talking about. The trust fund, Silas continued, his voice steady but carrying a dangerous edge. I set it up for your medical expenses and your living costs while you finished school. $4,000 a month. That's nearly $340,000 to date. I looked at my parents. Beatrice's face had gone the color of white ash. Her mouth hung open slightly. Garrett had frozen, his wine glass halfway to his mouth. A drop of red wine spilled onto his expensive white shirt, staining it like blood. I stammered. Grandpa, I never received a penny. Not 1 cent. Silas didn't look surprised. He turned his head slowly to look at his son. Garrett? Silas said. It wasn't a question. It was a summons. Garrett put the glass down. His hand was shaking so badly the stem chattered against the table. Dad, listen, Garrett started, a nervous smile plastered on his face. You have to understand. Valerie, she was young. She was irresponsible with money. You know how artists are. I'm an architect, I said, my voice rising. We managed it for her, Beatrice jumped in, her voice shrill. We put it into a holding account. To keep it safe. We didn't want her to waste it on parties or drugs. Drugs? I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. I can't afford Tylenol, let alone drugs. I live in a basement with mold. I reuse needles until they're blunt. I pointed at the phone. The viewer count had jumped to 2,000. You stole it, I said. The realization hit me like a physical blow. You stole my money. You stole my life. We didn't steal it. Garrett yelled, slamming his hand down. We invested it. We invested it in the family brand. Which benefits you, Valerie. If the family is rich, you are rich. I am eating eggs and expired bread. I screamed back. I am dying by inches. How does your brand help me when I'm in a diabetic coma? Oh, stop being so dramatic, Sienna rolled her eyes. You're always so intense. So Mom and Dad borrowed a little bit. They'll pay you back. God. Borrowed a little bit? Silas asked. His voice was terrifyingly calm. He reached down into his leather satchel that sat by his feet. He pulled out a thick, black folder. He placed it on the table with a heavy thud. I hired a forensic accountant 3 months ago, Silas said. I wanted to see how my granddaughter was spending her money. I wanted to see if she was happy. He opened the folder. Imagine my surprise when I found out the money never reached Valerie's account. Instead, it was diverted to a shell company called Prestige Lifestyle LLC. Owned by Garrett and Beatrice. Beatrice let out a small whimper. Invested? Silas mocked Garrett's earlier word. He put on his reading glasses. Let's see these investments. He ran a finger down the page. June 12, 2023. Withdrawal of $5,000. Memo, Sienna's rhinoplasty. He looked up at Sienna. Is your new nose an investment, Sienna? Sienna covered her nose instinctively. I needed it for my career. I had a deviated septum. July 4th, Silas continued. Withdrawal of $12,000. Memo, first-class tickets to Maldives. Beatrice and Garrett. He looked at my mother. Was the beach nice, Beatrice? Valerie was in the hospital that week. I checked her medical records. Dad, please, Garrett begged, sweat pouring down his face. We can explain. It's complicated finance. You've been away. You don't understand the modern market. I understand theft, Silas roared. He slammed the folder shut. The sound echoed through the silent restaurant. I looked at the phone. 15,000 viewers. The comments were flying so fast they were a blur. Arrest them. Justice for Valerie. I hope they rot. You didn't just steal money, Silas said, his voice trembling with rage. You looked at your daughter, who has a life-threatening illness, and you decided her life was worth less than a vacation. You decided she could rot so you could shine. Silas wasn't done. He flipped to another page. And here is the biggest investment, he said. The down payment and mortgage payments for the penthouse you currently live in. The one downtown. It's the family home, Beatrice cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining her mascara. We need a good address for business meetings. It was paid for entirely with Valerie's trust fund, Silas said. Every single payment came from the stolen money. He looked at me. Valerie, have you ever been to the penthouse? No, I said, feeling numb. Mom said I wasn't allowed. She said my shoes were too dirty for the white carpets. Silas laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound. Your shoes were too dirty for the carpet you paid for. Garrett stood up, trying to regain control. Okay, look. We made some mistakes. We overextended. But we will pay it back. I have a deal closing next month. A big one. We will write Valerie a check for everything. Just put the folder away, Dad. People are looking. People are looking all right, I said. I reached into the flowers and pulled out my phone. I held it up. The screen showed 22,000 viewers. Say hi to 22,000 people, Dad, I said. They just heard your confession. Garrett's face went white. Then purple. You ungrateful little witch. You recorded this? In Texas, only one party needs to consent to a recording, I said calmly. I consented. Beatrice lunged across the table, trying to grab the phone. Give me that. You're ruining us. Silas slammed his cane onto the table, shattering a plate. Sit down, Beatrice. She froze, terrified by the old man's power. She slowly sank back into her chair. The deal closing next month? Silas asked Garrett. The one with the Peterson group? Garrett nodded frantically. Yes. Yes. It's worth millions. I'll pay her back double. I called Bob Peterson this morning, Silas said. I told him about the audit. I told him who he was doing business with. He pulled the deal. You're bankrupt, Garrett. The silence that followed was absolute. Garrett slumped in his chair, defeated. Sienna started crying, loud, ugly sobs. Not for me. But because she knew the money tap had run dry. But, my influencer weekend, Sienna wailed. Who is going to pay for my VIP pass? Trey, the boyfriend, slowly stood up. He took the napkin off his lap and placed it on the table. I think I should go, Trey said. Trey? Sienna gasped. Where are you going? I don't date poor girls, he said simply. He walked out without looking back. Garrett was hyperventilating. We'll lose the house, he wheezed. We'll be on the street. No, Silas said. You won't lose the house. You never owned it. He pulled a legal document from his bag. This is a court order I obtained this afternoon. It's called a constructive trust. Since the penthouse was purchased with stolen funds from a trust, the law views the property as belonging to the original beneficiary. He slid the paper across the table to me. The penthouse is yours, Valerie. I looked at the document. My name was on the deed. And, Silas added, looking at Garrett with disgust. Since you are trespassing in her home, I suggest you find somewhere else to sleep tonight. You can't do this to us. Beatrice shrieked. I am your mother. I gave birth to you. And then you tried to kill me, I said. You let me walk home in the rain with DKA because you wanted wine. You are not my mother. You are a parasite. We have rights. Garrett yelled. Squatters' rights. We aren't leaving. I thought you might say that, Silas said. He checked his watch. That's why I called the Economic Crimes Unit an hour ago. They should be waiting in the lobby. As if on cue, 3 officers in suits walked into the private dining room. Garrett and Beatrice Sterling? The lead officer asked. No, Garrett whispered. You are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and elder abuse, the officer said. He pulled out handcuffs. Beatrice started screaming as they cuffed her. My dress. You're wrinkling my silk. Do you know who I am? We know exactly who you are, ma'am, the officer said. Garrett didn't fight. He just looked at the ground, weeping. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry. Silas didn't look at him. He looked at his wine glass. You're not sorry you did it, son. You're sorry you got caught. They dragged them out. The entire restaurant was silent, watching the spectacle. As they passed me, I held the phone up one last time. Say cheese, Mom, I said. It's for the family brand. Beatrice lunged at me, but the officer held her back. She looked like a wild animal. A cornered, desperate animal. Sienna was left sitting at the table alone. She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. Val, she whimpered. Can I stay at the penthouse? Just until I get back on my feet. I looked at my sister. The girl who mocked my shoes. The girl who bragged about her nose job while I starved. Get a job, Sienna, I said. I hear the warehouse is hiring. 1 month later. I stood on the balcony of the penthouse. The view of the city was incredible. The wind was cool, but I was warm in a thick cashmere sweater. The apartment was different now. I had ripped out the white carpets and put in warm wood. I had thrown out every stick of their gaudy furniture. I walked back inside. Mrs. Higgins was sitting on my new sofa, drinking tea from a delicate china cup. This tea is fancy, she chuckled. But I still prefer my Lipton. I have Lipton in the pantry, I smiled. I had moved Mrs. Higgins into the guest suite. She didn't have to pay rent. She just had to make her vegetable soup once a week. It was a fair trade. My blood sugar monitor beeped. 110. Perfect. I had a new continuous glucose monitor on my arm. My fridge was stocked with fresh vegetables, lean proteins, and 10 vials of insulin. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. Grandpa Silas sat in the armchair by the window, reading the newspaper. He looked peaceful. The trial is set for next month, he said, not looking up. The lawyer says they are pleading guilty to try and reduce the sentence. How long will they get? I asked. 5 to 10 years, Silas said. They lost everything. The friends, the status, the money. It's all gone. I felt a pang of something. Not pity. Just closure. Are you okay with that? Silas asked, looking at me over his glasses. I took a sip of my tea. I'm better than okay, Grandpa. I'm free. People say blood is thicker than water. But they forget the full quote, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The family you choose, like Mrs. Higgins, like Grandpa Silas, is more important than the family that shares your DNA but treats you like a bank account. My aunt called me yesterday. She said I was cruel for testifying against my parents. She said family protects family, no matter what. I told her that if family protected family, my parents wouldn't have bought a luxury car while I was walking to the ER. I chose to press charges. I chose to let them rot in a cell, just like they let me rot in that basement. Am I wrong? Should I have shown mercy to the people who showed me none? Or is this exactly what justice looks like? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed seeing karma served cold, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.